if you have certain health issues and you aren't aware of what is causing them and you think that you're eating a super healthy diet, you might want to take a look at oxalates. Hello, Make It Yourselfers. I hope you are all having a great day. I wanted to take a moment to make another quick video before I start working with my hands in the pans again. And I think this is really important, especially because a lot of people who follow me here or who follow my blog have followed a lot of the recipes that I've shared that have been gluten-free, a lot of paleo recipes. Most people who are following these types of recipes are looking for healthy alternatives, or they realize that they have a lot of food allergies or intolerances. While that's great, and a lot of people can find a lot of healing on the paleo diet, especially if they lean towards a more autoimmune paleo, I think that there is quite the danger to eliminate some foods and replace them with foods that are just as bad or maybe even worse for us without even realizing it. Even if you get better at first on a diet like this, a lot of that can be just from eliminating processed food, reducing your sugar intake, and just doing that, you can see a lot of improvements. But let's say you're eliminating gluten and you replace the gluten and the wheat and whatever with nut flours. Now, most people think of nuts as very healthy. I always did. And I ate a lot of nuts, and I wasn't even making a lot of things with nut flours, but my go-to snacks were often nuts and seeds. So today what I really want to talk about is oxalates. Basically a type of plant toxin. It's just one of the other defense mechanisms of plants. While I was working on my blog, I met a lot of other healthy living bloggers, and I heard about certain things. You hear about the phytic acid in nuts and seeds. So I would often pre-soak them, but I had no idea really that nuts and seeds were another big source of oxalates. With the paleo diet, you tend to exclude legumes, which I had a hard time digesting anyways, so very rarely would we have legumes. And they're another source of oxalates, which I wasn't aware of. Through my interactions with other healthy living bloggers, I actually did become aware of the idea of oxalates, and it was probably almost 10 years ago. A friend blogger had an incident with kidney stones, and that's how I learned about oxalates. But through my investigation at the time, if you just look at Google and you look at the responses there, you'll hear, well, if you don't have kidney stones, then oxalates aren't a problem for you. And they're only a problem for certain people. And if you don't have a problem with kidney stones, then you're fine. So my awareness was spinach, too much spinach can cause kidney stones, and that's the problem with oxalates. I had no idea that I likely had huge issues with oxalates, and many of the things that were not ever clearing up on my paleo and healthy diet were probably due to oxalates. Unlike other plant toxins like lectins and phytic acid, the problem with oxalates is when you stop eating them, the problem doesn't just stop there. The problem can continue for years while your body is detoxing itself from it. And you could be completely unaware that you're having a buildup of problems until symptoms eventually arise. You may not have any symptoms at all, and your body could just be very efficient at hiding this excess oxalate. Recently, last September, I decided to experiment and try the carnivore diet for a while. And I have another video on that, so I would love it for you to take a look and see the results I've had so far. Something unexpected happened when I started the carnivore diet. The first week, I felt amazing, but after about a week, I started noticing that I was getting a lot of symptoms of one of my health issues over the years. I've had very recurrent urinary tract infections, and in fact, in certain times of my life, I was getting them once a month. Now, when I cut out sugar and I cut out processed foods, and I'm very careful about what I eat and just cleanliness and all the different tips you hear for trying to avoid urinary tract infections, I was getting them less often, but I was still getting them much more often than what I would like. Obviously, I would like to never have urinary tract infections. About a week into the carnivore diet, I had my first presentation of urinary tract infection symptoms, but it didn't feel like it was going into a full-blown urinary tract infection. And I took one of the things that has helped me in the past right away. At the first signs of symptoms, I took some D-mannose. But I was noticing I was getting cloudy urine. I was getting that feeling that, of needing to go, but not really having any urine. I was able to have it go away, but I was noticing for several weeks that I was getting bouts of cloudy urine quite often. And then several weeks later, I started breaking out into hives. Now, this hives incidence coincided with my husband having a bad reaction to mussels. We went out on a Friday evening and we had some mussels, and he noticed he was so hungry, he was eating them, but he noticed what he said was one that just tasted off. And he already had it in his mouth, and he had already basically swallowed it. And about 15-20 minutes later, maybe even less than that, he was so sick that he had to go outside, and he was waiting in the parking, and I was there with my son, so we were waiting for him. I would periodically go check on him to make sure he was fine, and he kept telling me, go inside, until he eventually vomited it out. And I was fine. I was eating from the same bowl of mussels and had absolutely no reaction, no digestive issues. And that Sunday was the day I broke out into hives. I hadn't had any other sort of reaction, and everybody just assumed that with my husband's bad reaction to the mussels, that it was probably me getting a lower dose of the mussels and, just having a little bit of the liquid from whatever that bad mussel that could have gone into the rest of it. And I had my doubts. I looked it up. It seemed, possible, a little iffy, but, anything is possible. But those hives, I couldn't get them to go away for probably about a month. I had hives for over 3 weeks, definitely. And I also would occasionally just feel pain, like shards of glass were coming out of my face. And this whole area just was getting red, very red, and it would just be painful. And it would always coincide with a flare-up of the hives. And those hives were so itchy and I eventually had to take an antihistamine and use a corticosteroid cream to help just relieve the itching, because I just couldn't bear it. I couldn't be outside. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't deal with it. Anyway, throughout the whole hives incident and the cloudy urine, I was doing more investigation, and I came across the possibility that my hives and my other issues might actually be due to something else. And something that people in the carnivore community seem to be very aware of, but for some reason people in the paleo community don't talk about. And that was oxalate dumping. If you had had a high oxalate intake before you start a carnivore diet, and then a carnivore diet, which is basically only animal foods, is a very, very low oxalate diet. In fact, it's almost zero oxalates, except for maybe some oxalates in gelatin and bone broth and that sort of thing. Especially if you're somebody who has a high oxalate diet and you go to an extremely low one, your body will try to take out of storage all of the oxalate that can be stored in multiple different places. It can crystallize, become, calcium oxalate, and then that can end up crystallizing in kidney stones. But it doesn't have to just manifest as kidney stones. It could also accumulate in your joints and could end up giving you a different type of gout. Gout is usually due to high uric acid, but in this case, you can also have oxalate crystals that cause a sort of arthritis of sorts. You should try to avoid going from a very high oxalate diet to an extremely low one. And if you can keep a few of those oxalates incorporated, it can allow your body to detox it, but not at such an extreme rate. And that can help soften the symptoms so that you don't have these very harsh symptoms that not only can make you feel very unwell, it could even end up giving you problems, some of these more extreme problems like kidney stones. And I found this out the hard way. I had already been on the carnivore diet for like 2 to 3 months when I realized the issue. And then I was like, well, now what do I do? Do I start adding oxalates back? And I haven't really wanted to, although I have noticed that when I do have a certain extreme reaction to oxalate dumping, and one of the very unusual ones I have is that I get almost as if I had a fever, but with low body temperature, and I'm shivering and I'm so cold and I can't get over that feeling. And once I said, well, you know what? I'm just going to try a spoonful of peanut butter. And I snuck under an electric blanket. And me with my peanut butter, just one spoonful. I didn't want to overdo it. A spoonful of peanut butter, and I got under the electric blanket, and actually I felt better within about an hour. And I didn't think I was going to be able to go out that night. We had plans for dinner, and within the hour I was fine again. So a lot of these waves of oxalate dumping can come on really fast, but they can go away just as fast. And I was feeling horrible. I couldn't move. I was freezing, and it went away. I don't know if the spoonful of peanut butter helped, although a lot of the people in the try and low oxalate group seem to find that if they have a little bit of oxalates in their system, that can help reduce how much their body is trying to eliminate at once. So that can help ease this extreme oxalate dumping symptoms. And one thing that I have been doing is I've been incorporating a few oxalates in what I drink. I haven't been avoiding coffee, although I don't drink a lot of coffee personally. I don't drink it every day. But with my husband home on a biological fishing stop, he's been taking me out to coffee more often, so I will have some coffee with him. At home, I will occasionally have some tea. Tea is actually higher in oxalate than coffee. And I have been incorporating herbal teas that have cinnamon and black pepper. This one has black pepper and cinnamon and a few of these other, I think it might even have turmeric, and turmeric is another higher oxalate spice. Now you can find lists of high oxalate foods online, and I recommend avoiding the higher oxalate foods. You know, it will also depend upon dosage, so it's not like you can't have any of these, but especially the really high ones, I think that they cause more harm than good for probably just about everybody. Even if you don't realize that you have symptoms of oxalate problems, you could be slowly accumulating an excess of oxalates in your system and be blissfully unaware that it's happening. There's a lot of different symptoms of problems with oxalates, and one thing that I wasn't aware of is that recurrent urinary tract infections is one of them. Another thing that you might see if you have problems with oxalates is eczema or other skin conditions, which was something else that I have been dealing with for years. And I, especially on my right ankle and foot, I would get such severe eczema that it would keep me up often at night. I would scratch it until I was bleeding. And I noticed that it was mostly getting better on the carnivore diet, and at points it completely cleared up, only to come back not harshly at all, just a few bumps here and there, but it occasionally comes back in cycles. And that's one of the interesting things about oxalate dumping is your body won't do it all at once. It took years for those oxalates to build up, and it could take years for your body to rid itself of all of the oxalates. There's several things to be aware of. One, it's not considered the best idea to go directly from a super high oxalate diet to an extremely low one. And if you do it very dramatically like that, you can cause severe oxalate dumping. In my case, I really truly believe that my case of hives and all of these cycles of eczema on my ankle and all of these waves of cloudy urine and urinary tract infection symptoms that don't develop into a full urinary tract infection, which I had never had, by the way. I could always tell right away when I had an infection. They were part of oxalate detoxing, oxalate dumping. I noticed there was a growing awareness to the problem of oxalates. And I think a lot of that was because so many people now are trying the carnivore diet. So many people are having such a wonderful response to it. And even just the few comments I've gotten so far on my carnivore video, it's people who just have had so many different issues and they didn't know how to fix it, and then they get almost a miraculous response on the carnivore diet. But amongst having this wonderful reaction and this renewed energy and all of these other benefits, a lot of times people will have these problems. I investigated a little bit more and I started seeing interview after interview with Sally K. Norton, who at the time was writing the book Toxic Superfoods. And I really wanted to read the book, but it hadn't been published yet. I decided to contact her publishers. I asked the publishers if I could review it on my blog and if there would be the possibility of having an interview with Sally Norton. And this is the book. This isn't a bought version, actually. I printed it out. The publishers were kind enough to allow me an electronic version for review for the blog. And I like to print things. You can see that I have the version that's from the publisher. I like to print things out because I like to be able to bring them with me and just restudy it. I've already read it, but I've read it a certain chapters several times now. There's just a lot of really great information. So I'm really excited to be interviewing her. But there's a lot of other resources. There is a Trying Low Oxalate group on Facebook that has a ton of information. I haven't even begun to scratch at the surface of all of the files and information that can be found in that group. Let me just cover some of the highest oxalate foods. Now, when we're looking at green vegetables, the highest ones are spinach, chard, and beets and beet greens are very, very high in oxalates. Rhubarb is another food that's very, very high. There are other vegetables that, depending on how much you eat, they might be a little bit lower oxalate than some of the others, but they can end up having quite a bit too, like the nightshade family, potatoes, tomatoes, especially if you end up getting a very concentrated tomato paste and eat a lot of it, that can eventually add up. Some of the superfood healthy spices like turmeric and cinnamon and black pepper. Nuts and seeds can be very high. Some of the higher ones are, almonds. On the lower side, you can find maybe macadamia nuts. Pistachios might have a little bit less, but they're still all quite relatively high in oxalates. Seeds, pumpkin seeds, and sunflower seeds, I think, have a little bit less. But all of the nuts and seeds are pretty high. Flax seeds are lower. And then legumes. Legumes, pretty much all of the beans, the dried beans, are pretty high in oxalates. If you find one that is called a pea, like a chickpea or a black-eyed pea, those are supposed to be a little bit lower. What is generally recommended is to gradually lower your intake of those foods. Now, my diet was extremely, extremely high in oxalates, and I had no idea. I started off my morning with several glasses of matcha. Most of the time, luckily, I used coconut milk, but sometimes I did use almond milk, which is extremely high, especially if you make it homemade like I would make it, because you're using a lot of almonds, you're liberating a lot of that into the water. That can be an extremely high source of oxalates. But to make matters worse, to make it more filling so that I wouldn't eat until much later, I was adding a lot of chia seeds to my matcha latte. I would blend it all up, and I was starting off the day with quite a high dose of oxalates. Then for a snack, if I was hungry, I would often go reach for some celery, which is pretty moderately high in oxalates. I would dip it into extremely high oxalate almond butter that I would make. When I wasn't using almond butter, I would often use homemade cashew butter, or I would make a mix of almond and cashew butter. Even chocolate is high in oxalates. So if I had a square of chocolate, to avoid sugar, I would reach for the highest percentage of chocolate I could find. So, the really dark 96 to 99% chocolate, I would love those. And those, of course, are higher in oxalates. And then I would make healthy peanut butter cups where I would take homemade almond flour and I would mix it up with some peanut butter, and then I would freeze that and I would cover it in melted dark chocolate, and that would be my go-to dessert for when I wanted to give myself a treat. And of course, all of that is extremely high in oxalates. My dinner consisted of a lot of vegetables. A lot of vegetables often have a lot of oxalates. I was often making paleo type treats to share on the blog, and most of these are very heavily based on higher oxalate foods like almond flour, and even some of these other alternate flours can be higher. Now, coconut is lower. A lot of people do use coconut flour, and coconut flour isn't generally a problem. If you have certain health issues and you aren't aware of what is causing them, and you think that you're eating a super healthy diet, you might want to take a look at oxalates and see if you are eating a diet that is very high in them, because it's not just about kidney stones. It's not even just about urinary tract infections. It can come out in your skin. It can come out in your eyes. I've been having extremely dry eyes when I go through bouts of dumping. I am going to be interviewing Sally Norton soon. If there's any questions you want me to ask her, get me your comments really quickly, because I'm interviewing her this week, and I'm going to try to get this video published as soon as I can to give you time to ask questions so that I can ask her. So anyway, I hope you guys are having a great day. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. I will be trying to give you more healthy recipes that don't have a lot of oxalates. Sadly, a lot of the recipes that are already up on my blog do have quite a few, so I'm gonna have to go through and make a note, and I want people to be aware of the issue. And you know, it's one thing, if you want almonds one day, that's fine, but I think you need to at least be aware of the issue so that you can make choices and, you know, not go overboard on all oxalate foods all day, every day. You just need to be very careful. And I will be working on a lot more natural cosmetics and soaps soon too. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk soon.